said that we'd hope to bring you some making of videos. Well, here's the first of the making of videos. One of the more common inquiries that I get is about our Shinai Singlesticks, okay, which we've been using for, I don't know, almost 20 years, I guess. Traditionally, like originally, we used flotation buoys as hilts. That's an idea that we've got to thank Tony Wolff for many, many decades ago, who was putting them on single sticks, and I started putting them on Shinai as an alternative because we're using Shinai for longswords, and thought, well, maybe you can make a backsword out of Shinai, and you can. And to this day, I still think this is a vastly better introductory bouting weapon than anything else. The plastics I find, frankly, a bit dangerous. They do not flex in the direction in which you are hitting people, whereas these, because they flex in all planes, you can bash away at each other with fairly minimal protective gear. They're easy to get hold of all the bits and pieces, or at least they are for us. One of the most common questions I get is, where do you get the buoys from? Because they are apparently not available in a lot of countries, okay? I get them down at the local boating shop, but if you don't have a local boating shop, or they don't have anything like this, there are alternatives, and that's what this video is about, okay? Is how to make one of these when you don't have a flotation buoy. Option number one is to make a hilt out of kydex. That's just a leftover spare bit of kydex I have, which I have bent with the help of a heat gun. So you could do that, and that would do. But what we tend to use primarily these days, because it's less effort for me, I don't have to cut out the buoys and cut holes in it, is we get SCA hilts. These can be metal hilts. The metal hilts are actually pretty good because they add a lot of heft and weight to the sword and make it quite realistic in that way. But the standard thing I get are these plastic SCA hilts, which just go on with plumbing ties like that. So, very simple. This is how you make one. You start with a blank size 39 Shinai, okay? That's not 39 inches, by the way. It's 3 of a Japanese unit and 9 of another Japanese unit, okay? But size 39 is good for most grown-up adult people. Only go smaller if you're dealing with much smaller people. Then you're going to want your SCA hilt. These are not cheap, I must say, but they are pretty well indestructible. You will have to replace the Shinai many times over your lifetime, but you'll never need another hilt. And then you just need a couple of those things. Again, a couple of bucks at the hardware store. Make them big enough to fit around. It's bigger than you think to go around the Shinai. And that thing, that's what it's got to do. So experiment with your local sizes, but they are reasonably large ones. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually just tie the hilt on with those things. That's the first job. I looked at the tag, and these are 21 to 44 millimeter hose clamps. That's the size that fits best. The local, like Bunnings, used to have a different brand that came in different sizes, and there was a slightly smaller one that fit a little bit better. But currently, that's the size I can get that works. And I've just clamped them on like so, which is how it's designed to work. Now, subtleties to note, all the gnarly bits you want to have underneath the back bit, underneath there, not on top. You don't want it getting in the way of your wrist, so you want it underneath there. The gnarly bits at the front, you want on top, okay? Up there, you don't want to get them underneath where they'll get hit by the other Shinai. You want them on top. So as long as you orient your hose clamps that way, you'll be good. I've also added a little bit of tape on these just to hold them in place. Don't pretend to yourself that's going to do anything, okay? That's just there so when they loosen up, they don't fall off and I don't lose them. And you will need to tighten the hose clamps regularly. They do come undone with all the bashing. Now, I've got a little bit of extra there, which I want to take off for aesthetics and balance reasons. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut around the top with a Stanley knife and then split it down the seam. Okay, hopefully you can see in the light, there's a seam of sewing down there. I'm going to split it down to about there and peel it down like a banana skin, like so. So that's the leather peeled down. Once upon a time, when we first made these 20-something years ago, we just chopped the ends off. And then a kind kendoist pointed out this was a bad idea because a shinai is essentially held together by that tube of leather on that end, a tube of leather on this end, and the string holding it taut in between. And if you cut it off, the leather slides down and the whole thing becomes loose and falls apart. And they were right. So I'm going to have to sew this back up. But first of all, I'm going to chop this down as close to the end of the hilt as I reasonably can. Doesn't matter if there's an inch or two left over, but I'm going to chop off as much of this as I reasonably can. Chopped off like so. You'll notice that the four lames of the shinai are held together by a little razor blade in there, which I've now lost. So structurally, I need to push this back together now. So what I'm going to do is chop off some of this leather, not too much of it, okay? I need some of it because I need to be able to sew it over the top and the end there to make that taut. And to help make it taut, what I'm going to do is soak this leather in warm water, tap hot water, which makes it stretch a little bit, and then you sew it up while it's wet, and then you let it dry and it tightens back up. So that's going to take a little while. I will probably lose light before it's finished, and we'll still see what it's like in the morning. So I have sewn up the end of the leather like so. If you want to know what I'm using, I use waxed thread, which is fairly thick thread like that you get from leather supply shops or sometimes horse supply shops. If you can't get waxed thread, linen thread will be tough enough to do the job. And as you can see, it's fairly roughly sewn up there. This is still wet from the hot water, but that will dry off and shrink and hold the whole thing nice and taut. You can cover this with a knob if you wanted, such as a door stopper. So if you want to have something on the end like that, but it's not necessary. That can just sit like that and that will be fine. Okay, and that is the completed Shinai Singlestick. I always have a bag full of these things on hand to sell off to students at cost. But if you want to make your own in order to give yourself something to practice with and something to do, that's how you do it.